Hello and welcome. I'm so excited to be with you here today for one of my VIP interviews, my expert interviews. And today I'm here to introduce you to Paula O'Konneh. And Paula works with entrepreneurs and professionals who want to create a complete and sophisticated business profile online. I met Paula probably 2 years ago now, Paula,
Yes.
in North Carolina when I was speaking at the eWomen chapter there. And we've been in connection ever since. And so I wanted to bring Paula onto my VIP interviews, and I'm really excited for you to be here. So Paula works with you, whether it's a mobile-ready website that you need or you want to do interview-style podcasts. Paula can customize any service to your needs. And when she's not working with entrepreneurs and professionals, you can find her listening to Wharton Business Radio, and I want to hear more about that, to cooking, and spending time with her family. So welcome so much on my little show here today.
Thank you, Petra, for having me. I'm super excited to be on your show.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so tell me a little bit more podcasting. We talked that when we discussed to do this interview, we talked that we really wanted to figure out a little bit more on podcasting. You've been doing this for how long now?
I've been doing this since 2015, and I'll give you a little background how I came into it. I was looking for something to make me stand out a bit from the crowd, and the crowd of people who do, not the crowd of people, but web design and development is my business. And I noticed that when I went to networking meetings, I mentioned what I did and it didn't cause a buzz. And I thought, what can I do differently? Mm-hmm. And as I was driving to a client's business one day, I was listening to the radio and someone started talking about podcasting and what podcasting has done for her. And I was so intrigued. I called my client and said, I'm going to run a few minutes late because I didn't tell her why then, but I needed to hear the tail end of it. And basically, the person was speaking about what podcasts has done for her, and that it's a phenomenal way of marketing, and that it's a marketing tool that not a lot of people know about. And I thought, that's it. That's exactly what I want to do. So between listening to that on the radio and actually producing my podcast took exactly 12 months because I'm a perfectionist and I wanted everything to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I couldn't quite get things to be perfect until the 31st of December 2014 when I released my first one, because my goal was to have a podcast out and ready and listen, and people be able to listen to it on January 1st of 2015. And here we are today.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love the story because it shows when we are listening to the radio and we're listening to somebody else's podcast, we're listening to coaching calls, we're listening to mentor calls, when we're reading a book, just there's always something that we can take away from it. And if we're open to receiving that, I love that you got that message that day when you were driving in the car to get to a client, and it made a major difference in how you're showing up in your business now. That's awesome.
Yes, it is. And it still is.
Yeah. So what exactly is a podcast? If you could tell listeners who have perhaps not really thought about podcasting at all, what is it and how do you get started with it?
All right, so a podcast is really just an audio digital file that you can download on your computer or to your mobile device and listen to at your convenience. You heard me mention about listening to the radio in my car, and I'm wondering, have any of you been in that situation like me where you've heard this program and you just want to hear the end of it, but you've gotten to where you're going and you're like, oh my gosh, I really need to hear the end of this program. But that's where a podcast comes into being, because if you have a podcast on your computer, or better still on your smartphone or your iPad, mm-hmm. you can download it there, you can subscribe to this program, and you can have an opportunity to listen to it at your convenience, whether you're walking, whether you're driving, because now you can listen to it in the car, mm-hmm. or even if you are in the gym, mm-hmm. or even on an airplane. Because recently I took a very long trip to Australia, and podcasts kept me going. I listened to one after the next. It was marvelous. Australia is just, to me now, it's not 16 hours away. It's just down the road, literally.
Yeah, awesome. That is awesome. And that's a great idea of thinking about it from a different angle, that it's just really having all this wisdom in your pocket. It's like your iPod wisdom that you can carry along. I mean, it's lovely to listen to music, but the podcasting will be able to expand you in your life and expose you to new things. So I love that.
Great, absolutely.
Now, how are podcasters similar to public speakers? I mean, there's a lot of people who say, well, if I need to speak in front of a microphone or in front of a camera or something, that really scares me. So how are they different to public speakers?
Well, I'm going to flip it this way. If you're afraid of public speaking, why not start with a podcast? And I say that based on my experience. I did not enjoy public speaking. I tell people that I would have rather jumped out of a plane than stand in front of an audience of about 10 people and have to speak. Mm-hmm. I could do one-on-ones, I could do one-on-twos, but once it became like a little bit more than that, I would get so nervous, I wouldn't know what to say. Mm-hmm. But what the podcast did, it gave me the means of getting my voice out there. Maybe you could say hiding behind a microphone, but I don't want to say hiding. So talking to people, and lots of people, without having to stand in front of them and see them. Does that make sense to you,
Yeah.
Petra?
Oh, yeah, because I certainly have been struggling a lot with public speaking fear. And so I can totally relate to that. I do more a video recording in front of the screen, and some people say, well, how can you do that? You just talk to a screen. And for me, it's not like I'm talking to a screen. I'm thinking about all the people who will receive what I'm doing. So I can totally relate to that. And I love the analogy of saying, if you are fearful of public speaking, here is step one that you can do. And it's easier.
It is easier. It's because of doing the podcast now, doing some podcasts, that I am now a lot more comfortable being in a room full of people and talking about what I do, because I just visualize that, well, it's a podcast, but with people this time. And I've had to practice.
So how often do you record your podcast and screen it?
Oh, so I have two podcasts. I'll tell you about that. And second one came because of the first one. So my first podcast is Chatting with the Experts. And I developed that primarily because I wanted to know the business or the personal side to every business. Now, I would listen, as I mentioned, as Petra mentioned in my bio, I'd listened a lot to Sirius Radio and Wharton, powered by the Wharton Business School, and they had amazing programs. I'd sit in my car many a time, or if I had a long drive, I would just listen to one program after the next, women at work, and, people talking about, especially women, talking about how they got into business and ideas and all those sort of things. And that fascinated me, because you hear about, like, Facebook. There's somebody who created Facebook. I'd love to know, what made him think about that? Why did he do that? Who did he speak with? So in my case, I was bringing it back home. So I would go to network meetings and hear a lot of people talk about their business and how, give their elevator speeches. But I wanted to know more than that. So I wanted to find out, well, how did you create this business? What was your mission? What was your purpose? What drove you to start the business, and why are you doing it? Have you had any successes? Have you had any failures? Mm-hmm. And I found the podcast gave me that opportunity to do that, because now when I wanted to speak to a business owner, I wasn't asking them about business for me. I was asking them about themselves. I was asking them about what was the driving force that made them want to become an entrepreneur of some sort. It was amazing. I got to know so many people, and I guess many people got to know me. Mm-hmm. So that's why I named that podcast Chatting with the Experts, because every business owner is an expert in the field or whatever that it is that they do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what was your second podcast? You were saying that you have two, and the other one was a follow-up for the first one?
Well, when I say it was a follow-up, it's because I started the first one that I met the ladies that I now am a panel with. It's so the second podcast is about technology and about women. And we started, well, I met these ladies because of Chatting with Experts, my first podcast. And when we all came together, we all described ourselves as women in technology. The main mantra going through all our conversations was, where are the women in technology? There's so many women doing tech or professionals in technology, but they're not visible. They're almost invisible. So we wanted to start something that talked about that, showcased women, talked about our own struggles as being women in tech, and also to encourage women and girls to know that we didn't all come from a background. We didn't all start off where we are, but we've gotten to this point in spite of the stereotypes of women not really being good at tech or technology or engineering or math or science, that it doesn't matter where you are, but if that's your passion and if it's something that you really want to do, go for it. Mm-hmm. That's what my second podcast is about. It's not a solo podcast like Chatting with Experts, but it's more of a hybrid, or I should say more of because it's panel based.
Oh, okay, that's awesome. I mean, that's it. It speaks to your passion, and it also speaks to you how you're building people from the ground up, how you're lifting others as well at the same time. So I love that. And I do remember that when we talked very early, like right when I met you in North Carolina, you were telling me that this was something that you had on the horizon. So knowing that you've now created it, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So do you feel that somebody who wants to perhaps think about, okay, perhaps they're listening to us the same way that you were listening to the radio those few years ago, and they're thinking like, okay, podcast, yeah, I could do podcast. Is it important to have a deeper meaning behind your podcast? The why would people create a podcast?
It's necessary, I think, to have a deeper meaning, because I'll use myself as an example. I was so interested and intrigued by business owners. So that drove me to ask the questions to my guests. So if you're going to start a podcast, decide on your target audience, know who they are, and then decide on if you want to do that as a solo podcaster, or in a collaborative form or in a panel form as I do. So if it's going to be as a solo podcaster, then you know that you're the one who's going to have to reach out, get the guests, ask the questions, and you're going to, you'll just be doing the interviewing. But if it's going to be like a panel where you're going to have more than one person as the host, then it becomes a little bit more interesting, I want to say, because it's not just interview style now. It's a discussion. Because when I do the other podcast, and it took me a little while to get used to that, because I was used to being the interviewer. But with the panel style, it was now not just me interviewing a guest, but it was all of us interviewing a guest and then interviewing ourselves. So that took on a different dimension, and for a while I struggled a bit because I was like, I'm not used to this. I'm used to being the one asking the question, not being asked the question. But then I saw it as a way of growing, as a way of now putting myself out there as a form now of one step up in public speaking, because I was addressing not just the audience that I couldn't see, but also having a conversation with their fellow hosts on the show.
That sounds really interesting. So I wonder, that must be a little bit more work to coordinate and to know when is which person going, and must be a little bit more, or are you all sitting in the same room when you're doing this?
Yes, we all sit in the same room.
Okay.
It's actually been easier, I would say, in some ways, because I don't have to look for a guest by myself. Everybody brings guests.
Yeah.
We talk among ourselves. We collaborate. We work on our strengths and our weaknesses. So when I say work on strengths and weaknesses, like I have someone who's a great strategist. So one of the ladies there, she puts together, like all the documents that we're going to need for each episode. Then I have one of the other hosts. She is great at asking questions. So she puts all of that together. And when she asks those questions, they're always so engaging. And she has a wonderful voice. I keep telling her, I said, your voice is excellent. And then I guess I just kind of
You're the glue.
I'm a combination of all two. And
Yeah.
I don't think I'm as great a strategist, and I don't think I have the greatest of voices, but I bring something to the table, obviously.
Oh, yeah. And you brought the idea to the table too. You're the glue that brings it all together. So that's awesome. I love the idea. And I'm sure that listeners here are thinking about, oh, how could I do that? Or how could I do that? So what's the first steps on creating podcasts? What do you need to put in place? So what is the must-haves for a podcaster?
I'd say the must-have, as I said, was deciding on your target audience. So that's number one. Once you decide on your target audience, decide on what podcast style you'd like it to be. Do you want to be solo, like I did with my first one? Or do you want it to be like a group of you, like a panel style? Mm-hmm. So once you decide on that, then the next thing is deciding on, okay, what are you going to call? What's the name of what are you going to call your podcast? So come up with a name. When you come up with a name, then you need to come up with artwork. Most podcasts are hosted or listened to on iTunes. They were the original people to start podcasts. So you got to have an artwork that feeds their specifications, which is 1400 pixels by 1400 pixels. Then after you've done that, you've got to start thinking of how are you going to record your podcast? Are you going to do it at home in a home studio, or are you going to go to a professional studio? When I first started, I did not know anything about professional studios. So my option was just a home studio. Now with a home studio, what equipment would I need? I quickly figured out what I needed: a computer. I needed a microphone. I did some research on that. And then I needed to find out what software program worked best for me. I didn't want to spend too much money, so I used a free program called Audacity. Mm-hmm. But there's some other recording programs that are available. There's Adobe has one called Audible, and that's on a subscription basis. But the one I use is called Audacity. So I use that for recording, and I also use that for editing. And then with the home studio, then I had to decide whether I wanted to do it through the telephone or by Skype. And I had some failures there too, because the first Skype podcast that I did, after I ended it, and I thought it was a great interview, I played it back and I could only hear myself.
Oh yeah, I know that with Skype. I've had that too. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was a learning curve there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess once you've got all of those down pat, then comes some people say the post recording, which is the editing part. Are you going to edit it yourself or outsource it? Because depending on your your budget, if you're going to outsource it, then there's some money to pay for that. Mm-hmm. I had at first one of my family members editing it for me, and then when college got a little bit more, I don't want to say challenging, but when he got into his junior year, he couldn't do it any longer, and so I had to teach myself that, which has been great because I've learned now that
it's doable.
So those are some of the things to consider. But on the whole, I think podcasting is fun because you get to know your audience. You get to speak to people, and people relate. As human beings, we relate to voices. Because someone said this to me once and it made sense afterwards. The first voice all of us hear the first thing all of us hear is our mother's voices when we are in utero. And so we are, as human beings, we connect to voices. So a podcast gives you that opportunity to get that voice out there, and people relate to you, and they feel they feel almost like you're their friend.
Yeah, awesome. And the way how you were just going through this, it sounds very much like you've got a list that you've worked out that, when somebody starts a podcast, these are the things to know. Is that so?
I do have a list. I don't have a physical list that I look through. It's just kind of like based on having done that and having spoken about this to a few other people who are interested in creating podcasts. Yes, there is a list.
Yeah, there is a list of things to do. So
Yeah.
would you say podcasters are the voice behind business and products and services?
I would say they are. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the statistics right at my fingertips now, but podcasts have started to become a lot more popular now. People are a lot more aware of what they are now than they were 2 years ago when I started. Because I did mention to you that I wanted to make a difference when I went to any networking meeting and spoke about some of the things I did, and it did cause a ripple. People would say, "What's a podcast?" And I'd say, "Well, come talk to me."
Yeah,
So
yeah,
now a lot more people are
yeah.
aware of what a podcast
Of-
is.
and also of what you are doing. So it's created a lot more visibility for
Yeah,
you and your business, huh?
it
Awesome.
certainly has. It certainly has. Yes.
So what if somebody was to think about adding a podcast to their business, what would you say could be the potential results that they would get from offering a podcast?
One big thing would be credibility, and second thing I would say is visibility. Um, I I had, as I mentioned, I had another business. I do and I still do web design and development. But when I started a podcast, I found that a lot of more people knew who I was. And I'm not saying that to boast, but I'm just saying that in terms of now having doors open for me. Because when I'd call up someone and say, "I'm Paula O'Konneh, I am the host of Chatting with the Experts." It's a podcast in which we interview business owners. We want to know the story behind your business. The doors open. Most people said, "Yes, yes, I'd love to talk with you, but you come see me, or here's my card, or there'll be times that you can come to my office." And so that gave me an opportunity to get to know them. So I went and met a lot of business owners because I wanted to find out more about them. I wanted to find out the personality behind the business, and through that, not just did it give me credibility now when I said, "But I also have another business," but it also gave me visibility because I showcased those businesses. People got to know about those businesses. And through them knowing or hearing the stories of these business owners, whether they were solopreneurs or entrepreneurs, they got to know and hear the voice of Paula O'Konneh. So
Yeah.
it's been great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So now what I'd like to do is perhaps tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you, either because they are interested in your services with regards to websites, but also to learn more from you about podcasting. How can the listeners and viewers get in touch with you?
Well, I do have a website. It's called chattingwithexperts.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn. Just put in my name, Paula O'Konneh. I'll spell my last name because it's different. It's Okonneh, another N-E-H. And I say Okonneh because some people, when I say okay, they think I'm saying okay. Then
I will put those links under the video. So how about that? And that's awesome. And do you have something that our listeners may be able to take away from you? So something, do you have a download or something that we can direct them to?
Absolutely. I'm giving away today a list on how to create a podcast. I know that Petra did ask me if I have a list, and I said, "Oh, no, I don't. I just read it off my head." But I actually do have a list. And that's the gift I have for you guys, so that you can see the steps on how you can go about creating your podcast. And if it's overwhelming, call me. I'm also on Twitter. You can search me under Paula O'Konneh or Chatting with the Experts. And I am on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, why don't you send me all those links, the direct links, and I will add them all right under the video.
Absolutely. I'd love to do that.
Awesome. Well, Paula, thank you so much for your time and for being with me here today and for sharing your story, how you started with your podcast, and also your tidbits of how to get started with podcasts. For those of you who are listening now who want to start creating your own podcast, thinking about that panel version, I love that. And I'd love to get the link to both of your podcasts also added into the page so that people can listen into your podcast and start subscribing to that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Petra. This has been fun. Who would have known? As I said, the podcast is what has given me the courage to be able to do this. I would not have done this a year or two ago.
No, and you're in front of camera now, so here is the exposure is getting higher.
Yes, yes, yes. This is a step.
Thank you so much, Paula, and I will see you again soon.
Sure. Thanks.